We'll continue now in this same composition, but we'll use a different shape. So we can go ahead and select the shape layer and use backspace or delete to remove it. Next, let's go ahead and add a simple primitive by clicking and dragging the center. Remember, if we hold the Shift key down, we can draw a perfect circle. If you don't like the position where you've drawn your circle, hold down the space bar and move it up into the center or wherever you want to move it. This will serve as the body for a little octopus animation. So instead of calling this ellipse 1, let's rename it to body. So down in the timeline, I'll select the ellipse 1, use enter on the keyboard, then rename it body. Next, I'll add another shape, but I don't want to add it to the contents of the body. Instead, I want to add it to the shape layer, but I want it to have its own parameters. So I'll select shape layer, then click on the color chip for fill and select a new color. You'll notice once I do this, this changes the parameters for the other shapes that were selected. I don't have the body selected, but in the comp window we see that the paths for the shape are still selected. We'll cancel this, then make sure that these paths aren't selected. We'll select F2 to deselect everything, select contents, then draw a new shape. Again, we're going to hold down the Shift key to make a perfect circle. This time, we only have ellipse 1, our new elliptical shape, selected. Now we can go ahead and choose the color chip and modify the new color, click OK, then choose the word stroke and select none for no stroke. We'll select OK. Then I want to change the elliptical path's position. Here under position, it says 0, 0. It's at the original position where it was drawn. What we'll have to do is go down to the transformation for the ellipse and change this value to 0, 0. Now we can see that it's in the center of our composition. Rather than changing the transformation of the scale here, I'm going to close this up and change the size of the path that I've drawn. We'll change the value to about 75. Remember, because this is a primitive, changing the size is going to change all of the points in our circle. We'll change the name of this ellipse to eyeball. We'll duplicate it to make eyeball 2, but we don't really want a second eyeball. What we want to do is create a pupil. So I'll rename this from eyeball 2 to pupil. Inside of this duplicate, I already have this thing called ellipse path 1. We're going to call this white. We'll duplicate it and change the name of white 2 to black. Here inside the contents for pupil, I can change the fill value by twirling this down and changing the color from white to black. I'll click OK and twirl this back up. Now I can see that I have both a white shape and a black shape in this group called pupil. If I change the size for white, it doesn't make white material outside of the black path. Instead, I just have two different paths in this group. This entire group is filled with a single color, and that single color is black. Instead, what I need to do is create a Boolean operation and subtract the black value from the white value. I'll click undo to bring the white value back to its original size. Next, I'll scroll up a little bit and make sure that my pupil group is selected. Then, next to contents, I'll add an effector. The effector I want to use is merge paths. Similar to the way a pathfinder works in Illustrator, merge paths is going to give me Boolean operations that I can use from path to path in my shape layer. I'll click merge paths. Then under merge paths, I see that there are different modes. Currently, merge paths adds all of the paths together and delivers the result to the rest of the group. By clicking on the modes, we can see that there are several. Rather than leaving it with add, we can choose intersect. Currently, the two paths, the white path and the black path, are the same size, so the intersection looks the same. However, if I scale down the black path by changing its size, we can see that it only occurs in the area where it intersects the white path. Remember, the white path is just a duplicate of the eye that we made. Now, if I move the position for just the black path by changing its value here, and I'll drag it over to the side, we can see that the group, pupil, is only filled with black when these two shapes intersect. I'll move this back closer to the center and twirl this up. What I want to do next is create a small highlight for the pupil. I'll click on the path for black and again use Ctrl D or Command D on a Mac to duplicate it. I'm going to move black 2 down below my merged paths. Then I'll rename this highlight. What's happening now is highlight is a duplicate of black. If I move the black position by changing the position values here, we can see how merge paths creates the equation. As white intersects with black, it creates a merged path. Then highlight is added, creating a new path. And what's happening is that the new path adds to the black. What we want to do is add yet another merge paths function. So with the pupil group selected, we'll go to add and then add another merge paths operator. Currently, nothing is happening because we need to move merge paths 2 down below the highlight. Here we'll change the mode to subtract. What's happening is that merge paths is the equation when black and white intersect. Next, merge paths is the result, and the highlight will be subtracted from the result of merged paths. We need to scale this down a bit and change the position. So I'll change the size of this highlight and move it up. I'll close this up and also close up our merge paths too. Now simply animating the position for black, we can animate the pupil around the eye and the highlight won't move. Now if we close up all of the shapes in our contents, we should see that we have a pupil, an eyeball, and a body. What I want to do is move the pupil and the eyeball together into one group. So I'll select them by clicking on the pupil first, then shift-click on the eyeball. I'll use Control-G or Command-G on the Mac to group these together. This creates Group 1, and I'll call this Eye. Now if I open up the group called Eye, I can see that two subgroups, one called Pupil and another called Eyeball, and within those, a transformation for the entire group. The next thing I want to do is create an animation for a blink. I'll do that on the eyeball. So I'll twirl this down and open up the elliptical path that defines the eyeball. Here I want to set an animation for the size, and I only want to affect the size for the Y value. So I'll unlink the parameters. By moving down in the timeline, I can create a new keyframe by simply changing the value for Y from 75 down to 0. I'll move down to 15 frames, then change the value back to 75. Scrubbing in the timeline, I can see that I have a very slow blink. But if I move back to frame 7, I can see that the pupil is still visible. What I want to do is make sure that the pupil becomes invisible as the eye blinks. In order to do that, I'll open up the contents for the pupil and take a look at the white value. Remember, our merged paths are actually defining this shape. The highlight path is subtracted from the merged paths, and the merged paths is only when the black value exists when the white value exists. Also, remember, our white path is simply a duplicate of the eyeball. So what we can do is use the Alt key or the Option key and click on the stopwatch to create an expression. Then using the pick whip, drag down to the value for the size of our eyeball. We'll use Enter on the number pad to accept this, and now clicking and dragging on the timeline shows that the pupil is concealed when the white value inside this group is affected by the expression. We'll close this up and open up the black. The importance of this expression is that we still have the ability to change the position of the pupil while the eye is blinking. We'll close all of these up and focus on the group Eye itself. We're going to open up Eye, making sure to close all of the parts of that group. What I want to do is add another effector. The next effector we'll take a look at is the repeater. By going up to Add, we can see that repeater is another effector we can choose. By clicking the effector, we'll get the default value, which is 3, with a transformation value of 100 pixels. I don't need 3 eyes, I only need 2. So I'll change the number of copies to 2. Next, I can see that the position value, the transformation for the repeater, is pretty good, but the entire group is centered still. I'll close this up, close the repeater, then open up the transformations for this entire group called Eye. Here I'll change the anchor point by sliding it to the right and increasing the value to about 50 or exactly between the 100 pixel distance of our repeater. Now by clicking and dragging, I see the animation of the repeated eye follows that of the first.